Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing about the non-tariff barriers. We'll be covering the topics import quota, export subsidy, international cartel, dumping, voluntary export restraints, countervailing duties. We already have covered with regard to tariff, the partial equilibrium effect and the general equilibrium effect. And also we know that what is the tariff? The tariff is just a specific value which has been imposed by a country specifically to restrict the imports of goods and services. But when we discuss this non-tariff barriers, these are other than tariff which are imposed by the government or through the government policies to distort the trade. These refer to the restrictions resulting from prohibition conditions or specific market requirement that make product imports and exports difficult or costly. So this is applicable not only for these which we have mentioned over here, like these are the non-tariff barrier which we would be discussing in bit detail, but there are the other non-tariff barriers too, like the government releases through the documentations when the other countries has to produce like rules of origin documentation to enter in the market. Like Mexico requires a norm certification. Similarly, the China policies are different, the Japanese policies are different to enter in their market. So these are a country specific rules and the letters and the documentation which you require to enter in their own market. They are also acting as a non-tariff barrier. But here we'll be discussing more generalized non-tariff barriers which are applicable and used by the all countries equally. So let's discuss the import quota first in this regard. This is one of the most restrictive forms of protectionism. Quotas involve restriction of imports of a good to a definite quantitative level. In practice, this means that a country imposing a quota imports only a certain number of units of the good on an annual basis. In short, it's a direct quantitative restriction. All industrial nations, to protect their agriculture, and by developing nations to stimulate import substitution of manufactured products for a balance of payment reasons, they're using this import quota. It means most of the countries, they're using this import quota for the protectionism policies. Here we are going to discuss the partial equilibrium effect of this import quota. We have here at the x-axis the commodity X, and at the y-axis we have the price of X. This is the supply curve of the X commodity of this home market, and this is the demand curve of X commodity for this home market. This E intersection point of this demand and supply curve indicates the price of this X commodity is $3 in this home market, which is greater than this $1, and this $1 is the free trade price available in the foreign market. This is the foreign supply curve which is perfectly elastic. Now at this $1 price, this country is producing 10x of this X commodity, and the country is consuming 70x of this commodity. Means remaining 60x from C to B, they're actually importing from other country. Now what happens if there is the imposition of import quota equivalent to this J to H? This means that is $30, which is the imposition of import quota, or we consider this is 30x, 20 to 50, it means 30x, which is equivalent to this import quota. Now, as a result of this, the prices would now be rising from $1 to $2. Okay. And on the higher prices, the country is producing from 10x to 20x of this commodity and consuming 50x of this commodity from 70x. This area is showing the producer's surplus now, and this area is the loss in consumers' surplus now. Now what happens if the government auction off import licenses to the highest bidder in a competitive market? And the revenue effect would be here $30, that is equivalent to JHMN. So that is producing now equivalent amount of import tariff for the government. See here the difference when we impose import quota, that is on the quantity restriction. So here the quantity government has reduced from the J to H. Okay. Now because of that, because this quantity is restricted, And this has impacted on this economy. The amount of X commodities available now less. But at the same time, the government is auctioning off the import license here. So because of this auctioning off, the government collects some revenue that is equivalent to this JHNM. So when import quota is being imposed, this is not going directly to the government revenue collection. So the government can collect the revenue only by auctioning off or inviting bidding of these licenses. Now, what is the impact of this import quota? First of all, if we have this amount in the restriction of import quota, this commodity access now available less to this economy. Now, because of that, this consumers are demanding more, or the demand curve of this X commodity would shift rightward. So the other influencing factors would work out. It means from this to this, when the demand is rising, then this would affect the prices further. So the prices now would be increasing from $2 to $2.5. Now what happens here at H dash point? The H dash point indicates now the consumers are consuming from 50x to 55x and producing from 20x to 25x, these producers in this economy. So the producers surplus definitely would rise because the prices now are increased. So this is the motivation for the domestic producers to produce this commodity X more. But you see the first impact because of this quantity restriction, we can see in the result of increasing this demand, and the demand curve is shifted rightward. And this is giving this particular point H dash and the J dash as an immediate effect of it. But at the same time, you can see this K point. The K point, when we consider there is the collection of this import tariff equivalent to this import quota, then what happens? The $2 would remain the similar prices, and the similar production of this country, which is 20x, is resulting higher consumption than this particular point. It means this K point is indicating more welfare than this point of H prime. So the import quota is definitely resulting less welfare situation for the country whole. So with a given import quota, an increase in demand will result in a higher domestic price, that is now $2.5, and a greater domestic production than 20x to 25x. We know this is also producing this triangle, and we do consider this triangle of inefficiency. The reason behind it, this particular X commodity is not the comparative advantage of this home market. So that is why the production is now becoming higher, and also the prices are increasing, and you can see this much of the consumption. On the other hand, with a given import tariff, an increase in demand will leave the domestic price and domestic production both unchanged. So if this is happening when the import tariff is imposed, then you can see higher level of consumption than this particular situation. So that is the H dash point, and a K point is indicating the first difference between this import quota and the import tariff. We now will be discussing the other differences between the import quota and import tariff. We know that the import quota and tariffs are the same and having the same objectives, that is to reduce the level of import so as to protect the domestic industry, correcting the balance of payment deficit, expanding the domestic employment, economic activities too. But still they have differences. So the first difference we have the revenue effect. The tariff brings revenue to the government, whereas quotas do not. As we have seen in the previous slide, this JHMN is the portion of tariff which is the revenue of the government and can be utilized for the public welfare. But the import quota is basically is not the directly gain of a government, the direct collection of a government. In fact, this amount of a loss producers are imposing on the domestic consumers, and as a result of this, the prices are increasing from $2 to $2.5. So revenue with the tariff is collected by one who receives import license. So when the government can collects the revenue, when there is the auction of or this bidding of this license. So the license holders, what they do, they're able to buy imports now and resell them at a higher prices, that is from $2 to 2.5 in a domestic market. The second effect is the corruption and bribery. The distribution of import licenses may give rise to corruption and bribery on the part of government officials. Import tariffs do not create such evils of government corruption and political favorism. Then we have this third impact and the third difference between these two, monopoly profit. The monopoly profit is possible in case of imposition of import quota. The quotas create a monopoly profit for those who have import license. This means that consumer surplus is converted into monopoly profit. Thus, quotas are likely to lead to a greater loss of consumer welfare. Whereas, if a tariff is imposed, domestic price will be equal to import price plus tariff. Then we have the third impact, the third difference, that is nature of protectionism. In this protective effect, the trade shelters the domestic market from competition by foreign firms, while import quota offers protection to old inefficient firms as import licenses are generally offered to them. Then the difference is the price differential. We already have seen this thing through this diagram. That is, at import tariff, you can be here at the same price, which is $2, and can see with the change in demand, the higher consumption. But when import quota is there, the prices would be higher. Even this is the practice of all sellers and the producers who acquired license, and also they are following this import quota, or the import quota is being imposed on them. Then they have a practice to increase the prices in the economy as a result of change in increase in the demand curve. So that is the price differential situation in both of the case we already have discussed. Then the stability. An import quota is unstable because it can be changed at the discretion of bureaucracy, while a tariff is stable because any change in the tariff policy requires legislative approval. Then the preventing recession. That means quota may also be used as a device to prevent the international transmission of severe recession. Recession generally causes a fall in prices, and this may encourage exports. A country may make use of quotas to safeguard their interest against such recession and such practices, to encourage their own productions and also preventing their own home market. Then this also talk about visibility, because import quota, if we consider, they are less visible, whereas the import tariffs are more visible to the economy, because the foreign exporters may absorb all or part of the tariff by increasing their efficiency of operation or by accepting lower profits. So as a result of this, the actual reduction in imports may be less than what they anticipated. So exporters cannot do this with an import quota, since the quantity of imports allowed into the nation is clearly specified by the quota. So that is the reason why import quota is less visible. Then the domestic producers strongly preferred import quota on the import tariffs. Let's now discuss the export subsidy in this regard. The export subsidies are a payment to a firm or an individual that ships the good abroad. These are the direct payments or granting of a tax relief or the subsidized loans to the nation exporters to spur the nation's export. Like a tariff, an export subsidy can either be specific or ad valorem. As the government provides the export subsidy, shippers export the good till the point where the domestic price exceeds the foreign price by the amount of the subsidy. Although export subsidies may benefit industries and workers in a subsidized industry by increasing sales and employment, the benefits may be offset by certain costs that fall on the society as a whole. Consumers in the exporting nations suffer as the international terms of trade moves against them. Also, the taxes are required to finance the export subsidies, so the burden falls on the consumers. Here we are examining the partial equilibrium effect of the export subsidies. We have commodity X at the x-axis here and price of X we are taking at the y-axis. We have this demand curve of X commodity in the home market and the supply curve of X commodity in the home market. Now looking at this E point, this is indicating that this commodity's price is $3 in the home market. Is also indicating this commodity is the exportable commodity because it's lower than this free trade price in the world economy. It means this also showing the pro-trade situation because the good which is the produced more and also our comparative advantage commodity is being offered in the world economy as an exportable commodity. Now, if $3.5 is the free trade price, the consumers of this economy is consuming 20x of commodity and the producers are producing 35x of it. It means 15x B-C- is being exported in the world economy. Now, as a result of export subsidy, if the prices would increase from $3.5 to $4 for the consumers of the home market, then the consumers would buy only 10x of this commodity. Means their consumption would decline from 20x to 10x. This would be resulting this loss in consumers' surplus. At the same time, producers are producing more of this commodity from 35x to they are moving on 40x. So because they are now encouraged to produce more as a result of this export subsidy, the government may relax their taxes or provided them the more subsidies to produce more of this commodity now. So instead 35x, they are encouraged to produce 40x of this commodity. Now, as a result of this, their producer surplus would rise equivalent to this area, which is sum of this A dash, this B dash, and the C dash. Now, in this case, what is happening? You see, the sum of the consumer's loss A dash plus B dash would be lower than the A dash plus B dash and a C dash, which is the producer's surplus or the producer's gain in this case. If the producer's gain is greater than the loss in consumer surplus, the export subsidy would be effective for the country as a whole. And that is also showing the welfare of the consumers in the nation as a whole. So here in this case, $7.50 is a sum of this consumer's loss in consumer surplus and the gain in producer surplus that is equivalent to $18.75, that is the sum of A dash, B dash, and the C dash. Now, what is the cost of subsidy here the government has to pay? That is equivalent to B dash, C dash, and this is D dash. The cost of subsidy in this case, it is $15. The cost of subsidy would be equivalent to this production cost, okay? Production cost, the protection cost or the deadweight loss of the nation here, which is $3.75. You see here, this is the protection cost and this is the deadweight loss and this is the protection cost of the government, and both if you'll sum together, this gives you $3.75. So this area is definitely the protection cost or the deadweight loss of the government. And this area is also the sum of the portion of the cost of subsidy in this case. We'll now be discussing about the international cartel. An international cartel is an organization of suppliers of a commodity located in different nations, or it may be the group of governments that agrees to restrict output and exports of the commodity with the aim of maximizing or increasing the total profits of the organization. Although domestic cartels are illegal in the United States and restricted in Europe, the power of international cartels cannot easily be countered because they do not fall under the jurisdiction of any one nation. We know about the OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which by restricting production and export succeeded in expanding the price of crude oil between year 1973 and 74. The another example is International Air Transport Association, a cartel of major international airlines that met annually until 2007 to set international airfares and policies. Here we'll be discussing about this international cartel through this diagram, how they are following or acting as a non-tariff barrier to the world economy. See here at the x-axis, we have the commodity X, and the price of X we have at the y-axis. We have here the demand curve of X commodity and the marginal revenue curve of X commodity. This diagram is similar to the monopoly market. We have inelastic demand curve and the supply curve is upward sloping. The supply curve we are actually obtaining through the sigma marginal cost curve of the commodity X. Because we know the cartel is a group of firms, so the different firm has the different marginal cost, and through this marginal cost you sum the marginal cost, and from that itself we are getting the sigma marginal cost curve for the commodity X. So this marginal cost curve is intersecting this marginal revenue curve from its below, okay, and this also point F is indicating, which is an intersection point of marginal cost and marginal revenue, that shows the profit maximizing condition for this cartel. It means this cartel is acting as a monopoly in the world economy when they are following this profit maximizing condition and determining the output of commodity X and the price of commodity X, which is $3.50. If we do consider this $3 price, which is at the competitive market price. How it is a competitive market? Because the supply curve, we consider this marginal cost curve is equivalent to supply curve in case of perfect competitive market. So we consider this is a supply curve and this is a demand curve. So this E point of intersection is indicating $3 is a lower price than this. So definitely $3.50 is the monopoly price which the cartel can opt. And also the quantity you can see at the competitive market, which is this is amount of 400x, and whereas this cartel is producing or offering to the world economy or releases the supply of commodity X, this is $300. So this is how they do restrict the quantity of X commodity. So if you consider the X commodity is an oil product, then it means the oil per barrel which they are offering in the world economy, that is less now in the quantity as compared to the 400. So this is how they are able to increase the prices of per barrel oil. So this is acting, the cartels are acting as a non-tariff barrier for the world economy by restricting the output successfully and also increasing the prices in the world economy. Let's now discuss about the dumping. Trade barriers may also result from dumping. The dumping is recognized as a form of international price discrimination. Why it is international price discrimination? Because here we have two different markets. One is the domestic, means home market, and the other market is the foreign market. In domestic market, in a home market, you are keeping the prices high, and in foreign market, you are offering the same commodity at a lower price. So it happens when foreign buyers are charged reduced price as compared to domestic buyers for the same product. So after taking into the account of transportation cost and a tariff duties. Dumping is the export of a commodity at below cost, or at least the sale of a commodity at a lower price abroad than domestically. Dumping is classified in these three forms: sporadic dumping, predatory dumping, and persistent dumping. The sporadic dumping says that whenever you are offering this commodity in domestic market at a higher price and the same commodity international market at a lower price to discharge an unanticipated and a temporary surplus of your commodity. It means you are facing some surplus of the commodity which you are offering in the domestic market at a higher price, and you want to sell it or dump it at the outside. So that is called a sporadic dumping, which is actually you are dumping your temporary loss at a lower price in the international market. The predatory dumping says that it is a strategy of a particular firm that they already have acquired a monopoly in their own market, but in international market, this product is not known. So for the expansion in the international market, in the beginning itself, they want to keep these prices lower. And once it is known to all, then later on in the future market, they can increase the prices of this product. So that is the predatory dumping, which is a strategy of a producer how to expand their industry in the foreign market. What is a persistent dumping? This is a continuous tendency of a domestic monopolist to maximize total profit by selling the commodity at a higher price in the domestic market than the international market. So he basically wants to maximize his profit from both the markets together. It means by selling at higher prices in the domestic market and at lower prices in the foreign market. It means both ways he is actually getting from one market a monopoly profit and from other market it is a sales maximization profit. So persistent dumping is actually he is trying to maximize his own profit from this. We'll now be discussing the price discrimination or a form of dumping in the international market. So here we have two different markets. The one is domestic market and the foreign market. We all know the two different markets where he is keeping the different prices. In domestic market, as we discussed that he is following the monopoly, and basically monopoly says we have a relatively elastic demand curve, and that is why he would like to keep his prices at $4 and would like to keep his prices that is 100x. Here the most important is this marginal cost curve which is given for this producer, because this producer is common for domestic and a foreign market. So that is why the marginal cost would remain same in both the cases. Now here this marginal cost curve is intersecting this marginal revenue curve at this point where the price and output is determined, the price is higher and the output is less. Whereas for the foreign market, this output is 200 and the price is now less. Now for sporadic point of view or maybe persistent or maybe predatory. So in any strategy, if he wants to follow this for the dumping international market, he has to reduce his price at $3 and then can offer this commodity at at 200x amount. Okay. Now, if you go for a total market for him, you can have this marginal cost curve and you can sum this demand curve for home market and the foreign market altogether, which gives this total quantity and also the prices of this market. So this would be considered as a sigma MR. So here you can also have a demand curve, but we are considering only the summation of the demand marginal revenue curve, because he is trying to obtain the marginal revenue from domestic market and also from the foreign market. So altogether these two marginal revenue curves will be summed, so his total profit would be maximized. So the price discrimination is also acting as a non-tariff barrier in the world economy because of three different motives. Whenever he does the penetration of his product, that is also a fear or a threat for the other markets whenever this particular commodity is available at the lower prices. So the Chinese goods also can be considered the similar form of commodities. Whenever they are entering in other markets, they are always trying to penetrate their own goods for the further expansions of their industries. We can also see the causes of dumpings. The producer in one country are trying to be in competition with the producers in the other country. So that is also the reason why the producer of home market would like to go for foreign market for the further expansion and for following the predatory dumping, which is their own strategy for the expansion. The producers are also trying to clear off excess stuff which they are not able to sell in their own country. So we have seen that because of sporadic dumping, that is the temporary surplus which they have, they want to dump in the other country. So producers can make profit by dividing sales into domestic and a foreign market, as we already have seen, that is with the persistent dumping. So these are also the causes of dumping and also the forms of dumping as we discussed. We'll now be discussing about the voluntarily export restraints. These refer to the case where an importing country induces another nation to reduce its exports of a commodity voluntarily. Now, the one country, which is importing country, they may induce other nation who is the exporter to reduce their exports voluntarily. If they don't follow this, they will be threatened to impose another restrictions on that. So VRs are often created because an exporting nation might agree to voluntarily comply because they do not want to damage their relationships with the foreign government and the country's consumers. VRs are also generally imposed on the request of importers for providing them the protection on their own business in the domestic market. So it means they want to stop these exporters to come and give the competition in their own market. VRs is indeed like import quota, where the licenses are authorized to foreign governments and therefore is very expensive for importing country. The most remarkable example of VRs is when Japan levied a VR on its auto exports into the US, resulting from 1980s American pressure. So to protect their own auto industry, they imposed this VR on the Japan, and finally VR gave the US auto industry some protection against a high foreign competition. The voluntary export restraints have been negotiated since 1950s by the United States, the European Union, and the other industrial nations to curtail exports of textile, steel, electronic products, automobiles, and other products from Japan, Korea, and other nations. These are the mature industry that faced sharp decline in the employment in the industrial countries during the past 3 decades, but sometimes called orderly marketing arrangements. These voluntarily export restraints have allowed the United States and other industrial nations making use of them to save at least the appearance of continued support for the principle of free trade. Even we have examples of the United States who have negotiated the voluntarily export restraints with major steel suppliers in the year 1982 that limited imports to about 20% of the US steel market. It has been estimated that these arrangements have been saved up about 20,000 jobs, but raised the price of steel in the United States by 20 to 30%. So that is all about the voluntarily export restraints, which is acting as a non-tariff barrier for the countries when the other country would induce the exporting country to reduce their exports for saving their own market or for protectionism. They follow, we adopt this VER to be imposed on the other countries. Now we'll be discussing about this countervailing duties. The countervailing duties, like CVDs, are tariff levied on imported goods to offset subsidies made to producers of these goods in the exporting country. So it means we are trying to offset the subsidies which are provided to the exporting countries. Here, in the country who are the importing one. The CVDs are meant to level the playing field between domestic producers of a product and foreign producers of the same product who can afford to sell it at a lower price because of the subsidy they receive from the government. So as we discussed in the slide of the export subsidy, that the government, why they do give. The government would like to encourage the commodity, and they would now be able to produce it at the lower prices and can offer it in the international market, is acting as a barrier, a non-tariff barrier for the importing country. Now, suppose for this importing country, those who are actually importing this particular commodity, which is being subsidized by the exporting country. So in that case, this commodities price would be lower in the importing country. So it is now giving the competition for their own importing industry. So to protect these own importing industry, the country may apply this countervailing duties or may impose these countervailing duties on these imported goods which are subsidized by the exporting country. The law allows a country to place a countervailing duty on imports when a foreign government subsidizes exports of the product, which in turn causes injury to the import competing firms. So the countervailing duty is a tariff designed to counter the effects of a foreign export subsidy. So the country which is actually imposing or giving export subsidy to protect their own industry, and whenever it comes in the international market, the price would be lower, but giving the threat to another importing industry. So another importing country where they are producing the same product. So to counter this effect, they're imposing the countervailing duty. This is offsetting the effect of foreign export subsidy. So despite the fact that the export subsidy generates net benefits for the importing country, the importing country is allowed under WTO rules to protect itself from these benefits. So a CVD may be placed if it can be shown that a subsidy is indeed in place and if the subsidy causes injury to the import competing firms. So lastly, we'll be discussing about the tariff versus subsidy. Here we have the production possibility curve. And this particular case is also indicating a small country as analogous to the situation of general equilibrium effects of tariff we discussed. So here we have the one point, which is B point. And this point is indicating on the production possibility curve that this country is producing Y commodity this much and the X commodity this much. But the trade line for this country is equals to 1. This shows that the Px by Py for this country is equals to 1. And the country is producing this triangle of exchange that is now reaching on this indifference curve at the point E. It means the country is consuming the X and Y commodity somewhere here, but the X commodity is outside of this production possibility curve, indicates that the country has to import this commodity X from outside. So the situation B is showing the pro-trade situation where the country is producing the more of commodity Y which they are exporting and importing the commodity X from the other countries, and also showing this particular trade line that is Px by Py is equals to 1. Now suppose the country has imposed the import tariff. Now because of import tariff, this price line would now be steeper and the exchange rate would be changed now, that is equals to 2. It means the country's domestic producer would now be encouraged to produce more of this commodity X. So they are shifting the production possibility from B to F. So the country's production possibilities are now more encouraged towards the point F. Now this point F shows that the country is producing this triangle of exchange, which is H dash and F point is linking both. So it means the country is still importing the commodity X from outside. And this shows that because of imposition of tariff, the country has come down the lower indifference curve. Now suppose if the country would follow parallel price line, it means the parallel price line to the exchange rate Px by Py, which is equals to 1. If the country would be follow this parallel line, means following the same price line, Px by Py is equals to 1. So following the same exchange rate, if the country would intersect the point F, okay, then the country is reaching on a higher indifference curve than the H dash. It means this line is indicating now this industry, instead of following this from B to F import tariff, or instead of imposition of import tariff, if the country would be imposing or giving export subsidies to the X industry, then the X industry would now be produced more. And in that case, the exchange rate or the international prices would remain same. And on similar prices, the consumer is reaching on the higher indifference curve in this economy. So this indicates the tariff is actually leading to lower welfare. And if we provide export subsidy instead import tariff or imposition of tariff, that would lead for the consumer's welfare in the economy. So that is all about the analysis of non-tariff barriers in the economy. We discussed about the import quota and also in comparison with the import tariff, the export subsidy, also the countervailing duties to offset the effects of the export subsidies whenever you are the importing country. And also we discussed about the voluntarily exposed restraints. So all this tools and uh, the non-tariff barriers which are being adopted by the different countries for the motive of protectionism and also to expand their own industries. Thank you.